Hello, my name is Tylluan Penry. I'm a solitary pagan witch, an author and the founder of the Wolf and Howl Press. And today's little talk was suggested to me by a listener who wrote to me and asked, would I do a little talk about the different kind of entities, fairies, elves, brownies, hobgoblins, what have you, boggarts, and what are they, how do they differ from each other, how do we relate to them? Okay, first thing, which I think covers all of them, is how do we relate to things. I think what you have to remember is that the way people have interacted with the earth has not been something to be proud of a lot of the time. We have this tendency to believe we can just go and blow this up or mine that or dig a hole here or frack that. We can do what we like, without understanding that we are not the only people who live on this earth, on this planet. We share it. We may not always be able to see fairies, elves, what have you, but they are there. And you can think I'm potty if you like. And I didn't believe in fairies, really. I believed in house brownies and elves, but I had a lot of problems with fairies until I was almost 50. And then I was sitting out the garden and I saw them. They came over to me one day. Nobody was more surprised than I was, I can tell you. And yes, they had wings. So, I do believe in them now. And I do believe that wherever we are, if we sense that we're not alone, then I think it's right to behave with respect. This business of respect, to give you an example, the council were out recently chopping down hedges and trees. Now this is the nesting season. I don't know whether you can hear the birds in the background, but they're there. This is the nesting season. And, to go chopping down trees and hedges, it's stupid. We should be doing it anyway at the end of the growth season, because we'll get more out of the cutting back then. But at a time when the birds and that, they do not rely upon bushes and trees for their habitat. And it's the same with otherworldly entities, with the chthonic entities, the entities of the land, the brownies, the pixies, the elves, what have you. We should treat them with respect. And if we don't know what we want, we should use a little bit of common sense. So, for example, if you happen to be somewhere and you sense a very brooding presence. Now, there are two possibilities for this. One is that there are entities there and they don't particularly want to share their space with you. And I think we have to respect that. We have driven them out of so many places. We have urbanized the landscape. I think they're entitled to their own bit of space. The other possibility is that what you've disturbed is something along the lines of a thought form that is sort of collected there and grown and is not doing a lot, is rather sluggish, is just sort of sat there like a big blob. And it feeds upon people's reactions, so it has this rather menacing atmosphere it gives off, and then because you're startled and frightened by it, it feeds on those thoughts. So that's another possibility. Now, to go back to the different things, the word elf comes, it's a North European word, and one of the things that is enshrined in this word is the sense of something shining. That's where the word alp has the same linguistic heritage as elf. Elf and alp, shining, covered in snow. The problem with the traditions of elves is that they really caught the tail end where we don't have much by way of writing about them apart from the early church and monks, and they were very much, they regarded them as demons. They were devils, demons, evil creatures. And of course the trouble is, because the early Anglo-Saxons did not write things down, The heathen ones didn't. We really don't know exactly what they thought. We do know, however, that they couldn't have been entirely feared because the word elf turns up in boys' names, like Alfred the Great. Alfred is elf wisdom, elf reed. There was a church writer called Alfred, elf riches. That noise is one of the dogs shaking themselves. And I'm sorry, I'm not taking any notice now. I'm going to plough on with this. And you find it in lots of place names. You find Elfdean, Elfendine, things like that. So I don't think they were entirely feared or disliked. I think it was accepted that people shared their lives with them. They shared their homes and their areas. And the idea of sharing brings me now to the Lares and Penates. Now, this was a Roman concept. The Penates were the hearth gods. They had a shrine to them in the home, in the hearth. There were two of them. They were always offered food first at the table. The La was often shown as a young man, a child even, dancing with a cornucopia, always solitary. It's thought that's where the brownie, the house brownie, originated. Or maybe the brownie was earlier and the Romans took it over and called him the La. It's very much the luck of the house. They did good if you treated them well. And of course we're coming back to that old idea of reciprocity, where you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The whole idea that if we treat others well, even if they're not the same species as us, if we treat them well, we benefit too. It was always thought to be very unlucky to speak of the fairies as the fairies or the fae, so people tended, and I still tend, not in this talk obviously because I'm trying to explain what I mean, but normally I refer to them as the gentle folk, the gentle people. And the other thing that you sometimes came across were the good neighbours. The good neighbours, there'd be lots of them, and they'd live out on the land. Now they may be a version of the elves by another name, and there'd be a lot of them, and their job was to preserve the fertility of the land, to preserve its integrity, to look after it. And it's rather wonderful. I don't know whether you remember, there was a series on television in the 1970s called The Good Life, starring Richard Bryars and Felicity Kendall, about a couple who wanted to go back to basics. They wanted to be self-sufficient, grow all their own food. And when the series was sold to America, to the US, they changed the title and they called it The Good Neighbours. And actually there are these entities called the Good Neighbours. Don't know whether they knew that, who looked after the land, but entirely appropriate. One of those very happy accidents that sometimes you get. So my advice is, yes, there are lots of different things. There are elves, there are fairies, there are brownies who are probably the La, who the single entity in the house, could be mischievous, could be very, very helpful, depending on how you treated them, whether you respected them, whether you acknowledged them, which is true of all our dealings with otherworldly entities. The idea that you could set a brownie free by giving them a suit of clothes or a dish of cream, well, it varies. Some say you set them free, others say you really annoy them. The one thing you do not want to do is annoy anything that you coexist with. Believe you me, you don't. This is when you start getting problems. So treat them well, leave them a little offering of cream or honey or whatever it is you can offer, a little bit of bread. Just be kind. It's one of the great pieces of advice I have for dealing with anything. Be kind. There's always a time when you have to dig your heels in and be stern, but at least start out by being kind. And I hope that answered the listener's question, and I hope you found it interesting. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.